Every Indian outbreak that I have ever known has resulted from broken promises and broken treaties by the government. Buffalo Bill. When these treaties were broken, the result was the Sand Creek Massacre. Many Indians died because of uncalled attacks on Black Kettle and his tribe. There's additionally been numerous amounts of massacres leading up to this dreadful attack. Mostly all of them were over treaties they created between themselves and the U.S., all of them broken by westward expansion. The major issue between whites and the Indians was keeping these treaties from being broken and maintaining peace. A lot of the treaties were over maintaining lands for the Indians. Though the white population rising quickly, the whites had trouble keeping their promises. With war uprising between the two, nothing seemed to be getting better. The treaties were responsible for keeping the war from happening, but they could not hold. These unfulfilled treaties have forever changed Indian history. It may be regarded as certain that not a foot of land will ever be taken from the Indians without their own consent. Thomas Jefferson, 1786. Inspiration to move westward in the 1830s inspired the article of Manifest Destiny to be written in 1845. This said that it is our destiny to go expand west and live a new life, and in 1846, Americans exploded west to fulfill this destiny. As soon as the Americans left, the West was a total battleground. Hundreds of Indians were wiped out, and countless towns were destroyed. On January 24th, 1848, James Marshall, a mechanic, saw gold. This started the most frantic movement for wealth in history, and people went insane. Thousands of people from the U.S. and from all around the world came to look for gold. Some came as far as Asia. This was the gold rush of 1849. This changed the relationship between the Indians and the oncoming whites throughout the time period. Eventually, the Indians were getting frustrated with how many whites were coming onto their lands. They were taking up their resources, giving them diseases, and taking their land. This is when treaties started to be signed. In 1851, the gold rush traffic had increased traffic between Arkansas and Missouri rivers, so the 1851 Fort Laramie Treaty was created. The treaty was established to protect the right-of-way for migrants. It was signed September 17th between the United States Treaty Commissioners and representatives of seven different Indian nations, including the Cheyenne, Arapaho, and Sioux. The Indians stated in the treaty through the land. Several tribes never received the payments. Additionally, the treaty only introduced a brief period of peace. It was broken by failure of the United States government to prevent mass immigration of the settlers and miners from the Indians' territory. The United States chose not to enforce the treaty, even though they had enough money to do so. In relevance to this, a Sioux named High Forehead killed a cow belonging to a Mormon traveling east of the Mormon Trail. The news traveled to the chief commanding officer, Lieutenant Hugh Fleming of Fort Laramie. According to the 1851 Fort Laramie Treaty, the military should have never been involved. Though Lieutenant Fleming still talked to Chief Conquering Bear about the killing of the cow, the owner demanded $25, but Conquering Bear refused. The next day, Lieutenant Lawrence Grattan went to the arrest of High Forehead. He brought an interpreter, and the interpreter started insulting the warriors of the Sioux. The situation got out of hand very quickly, and on August 19, 1854, the Sioux attacked Grattan Army. The attack occurred east of Fort Laramie and the Nebraska Territory. This was known as the Grattan Massacre. The result of the attack was the Lakota tribe shooting back, killing 29 soldiers and the interpreter. Approximately 10 years later, on February 18, 1861, the terms of the Fort Wise Treaty were made between the U.S., 6 chiefs of the Arapaho tribe, and 4 chiefs of the Cheyenne tribe. This new treaty gave less than 1/13 of the land of the 1851 Fort Laramie Treaty had promised. This was because of the vastly expanding gold rush movement. This reserve was located in eastern Colorado between the New Mexico border and the Sand Creek River. Bands of the Cheyenne, Lakota, and Dog soldiers chose not to accept the constraints of this treaty. In fact, they completely disowned the treaty and chose to continue to hunt, where the increasingly large immigration of whites had gold fields. The Indian rebels said there's not enough chiefs of the tribes agreed to sign the treaty, and they had no idea what they were signing into. The whites, on the other hand, said it was a solemn obligation. They decided that the Indians who didn't want to follow the laws of the treaty were starting a war. Our land is more valuable than your money. It will last forever. It will not perish by the flames of fire. As long as the sun shines and the water follow, this land will be given here to the men and animals. We cannot sell the lives of the men and animals. It was put here by the Great Spirit, and we cannot sell it because it does not belong to us. Crowfoot. 3 years later, in 1864, the volunteer soldiers of Colorado attacked an Indian, Cheyenne, and Arapaho camp reserved by them by the Fort Wise Treaty. The demand for native lands was simply too much, and the agreement of the treaty collapsed. On the morning of November 29th, 1864, Colonel John Chivington led a group of Colorado volunteer soldiers to the camp and attacked a town of Sand Creek. Most of the village was still asleep, and when the soldiers came to attack, Black Kettle, the leader of the Cheyenne tribe, immediately rushed outside and put up a flag as a sign of peace. The soldiers took no notice to the flag and fired from all sides immediately. Most of the village retreated up the creek, but many were unlucky and were not able to get out in time. The soldiers ended up killing about 130 people, including women and children, almost all of them dead and were scalped, mutilated. This was the Sand Creek Massacre. The Indians renamed the group of Colorado soldiers the Bloody Third after what they had done. When the word of the horrifying attack spread to the government, the Treaty of Little Arkansas was signed in 1865, when the government acknowledged the gross and wanton attacks of the Indian tribe. It promised the Indians free access to land south of the Arkansas River, and they promised land and cash reparations to the surviving descendants of the Sand Creek Massacre. Less than 2 years after the treaty was signed, the government ignored all major provisions, and moreover, the Medicine Lodge Treaty took away 90% of the promised land later on, and located them to reserves and less desirable sites in Oklahoma. The other Indians tribe reacted much differently when the word spread to them. The tribes agreed that the whites had to be met by force. In 1866, the Sioux tribe led an attack under the leadership of the Lakota Sioux warrior named Crazy Horse. The Lakota Sioux, the Northern Cheyenne, and the Arapaho were tribes who staged the ambush just 3 miles outside of Fort Phil Kearny. On the morning of December 21st, 1866, scouts on Pilot Hill signaled that they were being ambushed from the top of the hill. Colonel Henry Carrington took the defensive side and specifically told Captain William J. Fetterman not to pursue Long Trail Ridge under no circumstances. But Fetterman before had a higher rank of bravery than Carrington, and Fetterman overlooked the order. He said he could defeat the small tribe of Indians on Long Trail Ridge and decided to take his men in attack. What the man did not know was that the small tribe of Indians that were attacking were accompanied by 1,000 other Indians surrounding the area. The hiding Indians immediately took action on Fetterman's soldiers and completely mutilated the whole 80 soldiers, including Fetterman himself. This was the start of the Bozeman Trail War, because the Fetterman Massacre took place near the trail. Though this war was commonly known as Red Cloud's War, the war fought between Lakota, the Northern Cheyenne, and Arapaho tribes against the U.S. It was fought over between the Powder River country in Wyoming, and beforehand, in 1864, Americans blazed through the Bozeman Trail through the land of the Indians. It crowded because the trail was the shortest route from Fort Laramie and the Oregon Trail to the Montana goldfields. From 1864 and 1866, the trail was filled with 3,500 miners, immigrants, and settlers, with 12 gold mining camps as well. The immigrants competed with the Indians for depleting resources near the trail. The trail was known as the Freedom Trail to the Americans and the Thieves Trail to the Indians. The people knew it was time to have peace, and in 1868 the Fort Laramie Treaty was signed, and the Indians had obtained victory. The Black Hills was a sacred part of the land for the Sioux people, so they obtained the land as part of their treaty. However, about 8 years later, General George Custer led an expedition accompanied by miners who were determined to find gold. As soon as gold was found inside the area, miners were rushing into Sioux land, and the miners immediately demanded protection from the U.S. military. The Sioux War of 1876 occurred, and the Indian tribes annihilated the army. The U.S. would not give up, though, and in 1877, the American army eventually ended up confiscating the land. Today, the ownership of the Black Hills still remains a major legal dispute between the U.S. and the Sioux tribe. After all those countless years of battle and war, the article Manifest Destiny had played a major role in U.S. history, depending on which side you hear from, the big ups and big downs. For the Americans, the Manifest Destiny was a key component for expanding the country west and finding great wealth through the gold rush. On the other hand, from the Indians' perspective, the Manifest Destiny destroyed what was left of the Indian culture and their homeland. The treaties that were made between the U.S. and the Indians were simply no match for the expansion of the gold rush, and all of the treaties were broken many times and were never fulfilled. To this day, the Little Arkansas Treaty still hasn't fully paid back to the Indians. There's been more awareness of this treaty, but no one chooses to enforce it. All of this isn't really fair to the Indians. But where would the U.S. be today without the gold rush? This is an arguable question that has changed people's lives today. They've made us promises, more than I can remember, but they kept one. They promised to take our land, and they took it.